Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, the podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, Agile experts, including professional Scrum trainers and other industry thought leaders, share their stories and experiences. We also explore hot topics in our space with thought-provoking, challenging, energetic discussions. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org. We've got a pretty awesome podcast for you today. I'm sort of super excited on so many levels, but because today we're talking about Agile at the business level, Agile as an operating system, or maybe a product operating model. And you know, I get really excited about that. I'm very lucky to have Nathaniel Davis. You may know Nathaniel because he was CEO of DrinkWorks, think Keurig for cocktails and booze, or maybe his current position as CEO of Bow One Collective, a New England brewing powerhouse with products including Harpoon, Smutty Nose, and actually my personal favorite is from Massachusetts. In the world of IPAs, I'm afraid I love a Pilsner, and they have a fantastic Pilsner, Czech Pilsner, that I always go to on the menu. Also, they're recently famous for the crossover with Dunkin' called Dunkin' Spike. Some of you may have seen that. Welcome to the podcast, Nathaniel.
Thanks, Dave. Nice to be here.
It is great to have you. And also, just to ensure that this conversation stays on point, we have the PST Safe Fellow and all-round really smart guy, Yuval Yeret. Welcome to the podcast again, Yuval.
Thank you, Dave. I admit I don't like IPAs. I didn't tell you that, Andy. I'm more of a wheat beer and cider fan.
So you've got to, well, I'm not anti-IPA, I will drink them, but I just love a good, particularly in the summer, a Pilsner. But as you see, we could easily get sidetracked, and that's not
about beer the whole time.
we could, and I have been known to do that, but that's not what we're here for. And our listeners, though many of them are really interested in beer, would love to hear a little bit about agility and your journey. So let's start. You know, you've led Nathaniel, organizations that blend physical products, customer experience, from DrinkWorks to now Bow One Collective. When did you first realize that traditional management systems weren't enough, and what led you to this more agile way of working?
Well, thanks. My background is actually with a very large brewing company. I worked for Anheuser-Busch and AB InBev after that, a global brewer, and so my job was basically R&D and innovation within a big scaled global organization, and it was an amazing organization for systems. It was a machine of process, and to innovate within that was quite a challenge, and thinking through about systems that can operate on the fringes and then bring into a giant scaled machine was what started me learning about Agile models and Agile philosophies and ways to approach it in the context of a big corporate entity. Ultimately, I spun out with some technology to form a joint venture called DrinkWorks, which was AB InBev and Keurig Dr. Pepper, as you mentioned at the top of the hour. And I actually came to lean into an Agile-focused operating system from culture as a standpoint, more so than either product or process. So we were thinking about how we had members that had at one point been part of one company or another that had been sort of assigned in. We had brought in other people from outside, and this entity was not the same culture as one of the big companies that had formed it. Otherwise, it would have been still part of that company. We had an obligation to be more entrepreneurial, much faster moving, lighter weight, more product focused, more user oriented from start to finish. And we had an obligation to really articulate our culture as unique, different, and espousing all of those values and moving forward quickly. And so it came together as we were starting to define who we were, why did we exist, and how did we operate. All of that came together. And so From the inception of that company, we had decided that we were going to be born Agile. Scrum was the operating system of choice, and so it was integrated into our routines from strategic planning to budgeting to the cadence of communication and everything in between from pretty early on in that endeavor. Some parts of it were difficult and more challenging. Others worked flawlessly, and I carried forward. And so, as you know, and if I turn the page and think about where I am now, I've landed in a brewing group. It's an organization with multiple breweries, 14, 15 brands, number of them licensed brands, 3 operating breweries, 9 restaurant tap rooms. It's a big complex organization and quite different, but still housed in there. It's doesn't use the language or the formalities of any Agile system, but it has many of the foundational underpinnings that I see as the environment in which it can thrive given the right push. And that's the journey that I'm on now, thinking through instilling and advancing systems with a little bit of organization around a company that is Agile at heart, but just doesn't use the language as such. So it's part of the journey now.
So why, when you were at Drinkworks and you were forming this new entity, didn't you just take all the systems from, you worked for a big, proven, super successful organization? Why didn't you just take those systems? Was it because of that sort of entrepreneurial experimentation idea, or was it because there was a large amount of software and tech now? What was that catalyst, that single catalyst?
Well, it really was that the goal and the mandate was to create products within and largely create a new category at the intersection of home appliances and adult beverages, or alcohol cocktails is where we landed. And so we, by rights, were not a scaled massive beverage system doing everything the same way on a large scale. We needed to understand the user, define the problem to solve, fall in love with that problem, but not a particular solution, iterate around how we're going to actually solve it. Then we needed to design, the product, invent some new technology, quickly prove what choices to make, all while moving super fast and scaling up, where we had complexity in the product, complexity in route to market, uncertainty everywhere. It was not the same beast as, making beer, selling beer.
Yeah, much. I think that growth thing, that experimentation, that complexity element really lends itself brilliantly for Agile. Obviously, I'm a little biased. All right, so I want to get something out there, and I'd love to get you into this question as well, Yuval, in a moment. But in a business that makes beer, runs tap rooms, delivers hospitality experiences, what does agility mean to you as a CEO? I'd love to get your words on that.
Well, I think of, agility at the enterprise level as fundamentally being, one, the understanding that management's role is not to tell people what to do, but to create an environment in which people do their best work, right? That, and that is a philosophy that has to guide all of it. You need to assume that the people who know best what the decision are closest to its implementation. And it's your role to, yes, dictate resources and set large, lofty strategic goals, but to allow the flexibility for people and the permission for them to make decisions on the fly at the interface with where the market happens, where the users are using. And so to create those conditions are really, that is the role of leadership. And that's fundamental to my mind, what agility means. It is that permission, and it's the total environment. The idea of products should be broadly applied. It does not mean necessarily what's inside the package. It means how you made it, how you conceived of it, the culture in which we operate, the handbooks in HR. Each of these things, if they have features and elements, if they can be iteratively improved, they can gain feedback and look up, see what worked, what didn't, and try again and improve it again, whether that's culture, me, a system or process that we use, budgeting, strategic planning, or yes, the beer, the package, the label, the graphics, the marketing, and everything in between, is a very useful construct across the board. With the notable caveat of not being so precious about process and so precious about the language that people use to be. I think of it as being very expansive in the definition of what a product is, but not precious about the specifics of the process or the language used to get there.
I'd like to just bring you in, Yuval. Obviously, you teach agility. In fact, you even taught me some agility back in the day. So anything you'd add to that really awesome definition?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only thing I'll add is, why is it useful to use agility in all of these scenarios in my experience? I guess the way I look at it is, if you look at your strategy as a CEO, as a leader, anywhere that you apply strategy, if we go to Roger Martin, for example, it's how are you going to win? Where are you going to play? How are you going to win? What's your, let's call it alpha, I work a lot in the financial world, so something rubs off there. But what's your alpha? What are you going to try to do differently? What's at the core of the difference? So in the case of Barrel One Collective, what's going to be unique about how they do hospitality, or how they integrate multiple beer brands into one organization, how to leverage the connection between these different things. When there's alpha, there's opportunity, but there's also risk. The magic that we have with agility is that, unlike the markets where, unless you have insider information, you have that risk and you hedge it in different ways. The way we can hedge the alpha risk in our organizations is by experimenting, by empowering people to make decisions faster, closer to the work, and to see if the idea we have about the new menu or the new way to drive events is worthwhile without going all the way down the path of implementing it. That, for me, is the essence of why agility makes sense for the business.
I love that we balance the idea of a trust, freedom, being closest to the problem, creating this environment for success and goals. And then you added into it experimentation, frequent feedback loops, reducing the distance from problem to solution and decision making about that. And I think that's awesome. But experimentation, I obviously I work with a lot of large traditional organizations. Experimentation, this idea of balancing creative experimentation with operational consistency. And an example in hospitality, there's definitely consistency, and building beer is the same. Everything that people don't like experimentation. So, Nathaniel, what do you think? I mean, how do you even balance those different things at any one moment?
Well, I mean, where we apply this most frequently today, and where we're thinking about the most, is actually at the level of capabilities rather than meddling with the core services. So when I'm thinking about experimentation in a hospitality setting, for example, I'm talking about I have I have a tap room that's focused on giving brewery tours and tasting flights of beer and giving them some great, a burger or a nice German pretzel and pairing these things up, whatever. If I'm experimenting, I'll come in with a Tiger team, drop in with 4 batch cocktails, and open up a whole new section of the menu in order to see whether or not that basic, a new set of offerings, which they, by rights don't have the core capabilities in-house at the local level to do, and we can drop in and give a whole new dimension to the menu. And the experiment is to see whether or not our current clientele is interested in tasting that, and then you dive into the details of whether they like, cocktail A, B, and C, and get the feedback on what that is. So that's a way in which the risk of abject failure is relatively low, because failure is they chose not to avail themselves of a tasty little different drink. It just went for the core. So you don't have to mess with the core offering necessarily in order to open up a whole new dimension of service or enjoyment or opening up to somebody new. And that's just one example of kind of the way that we experiment within hospitality, is at the level of what they're able to do and what they're able to offer. And then if it works in one place, we might replicate it across multiple locations, or we might, additionally run experiments only within a private event, on one night only. And then you're not messing with the core menu and the regulars, and yeah, you might mess with other aspects that are more core. But there's plenty of experimentation, which is growth opportunity and expansion and additional interest and additional features and value for either people who are coming now or new people that aren't coming yet. That gives us a sort of a great balance of risk and reward, in my mind.
And I think what you touched on there, Daniel, was this. My mum used to work in a supermarket, and the supermarket always experimented. Well, didn't always, but occasionally experimented with things. Probably didn't enough. But the problem, she said, it was just always additive. So she had a full-time job. She was busy. She was, running the cigarette counter, like you do. And, the execs used to come like, oh, no, you're going to do this as well. Wear a hat and play a banjo, and she was like, I haven't got time. I think what you highlighted is that be mindful of the environment your experimentation is going into, and be very cognizant, listen to those stakeholders and ask those the questions, because if they're not in support, like you bring in a new cocktail into the tap room, you try it, but you don't give them any support, then what's going to happen, really. It's not, I mean, if they're lucky, you might get a couple of, but they're going to be concentrating on their day job always, unless you change their rewards, and then that could change maybe. But ultimately, I think that broader stakeholder view for experimentation and looking at the impact is crucial. Yuval, you probably want to talk a little about OKRs and measures, don't you? That's a key.
Not
whenever
yet.
you talk about experimentation, you always bring up those. Yeah.
I mean, I just want to ground us back to classic product management, classic product development, and I think all of this applies. I think Jeffrey Moore talked about the stage at which a lot of the work that we do in IT and in product development move from systems of record that you simply have to, record your stuff in, to systems of experience where you have options. I think it's also as the decades go by, even when people have to do things, they don't necessarily do them. So when we design experiences, when we're a product owner, product manager, that needs to deliver a product that affects somebody and creates behavior, we need to think about all of these things. Mm-hmm. Every feature we develop is some sort of bet that it would drive the right behavior. Sometimes we treat it as a bet, sometimes we don't. But essentially, it's changing the way people are doing things. It's going into the way people are operating something, whether it's the way they're managing their client relations or managing their timesheets or developing applications using AI with vibe coding. Whatever it is, we have an hypothesis that this would change for the better, their behavior in a way that would drive impact, that would make our product more successful, more sticky for them, or if it's an internal organization, that they would resist less doing the thing we want them to do. Now, the role of metrics is to help us see what's going on. The role of KPIs is to tell us what's going on and where do we even need to experiment. If the core is working, if a certain type of beer or menu item is selling like crazy, working well, I wouldn't change anything about the recipe for it. What I might focus on is can I make it more efficient to make it, but I wouldn't change the recipe. If there's
can I sell them a
not
pretzel?
selling, that's an issue.
Yeah. And can I upsell or add another pretzel to it? But it's interesting that you leaned in very heavily, Yuval, on experience and that element of a product. Ultimately, that is the thing, really, even if it does, it has capabilities and does this and does that, but ultimately it's in the context of an experience. How broad do you think thinking about experience needs to be in an organization when you're on this journey? Is it, Nathaniel, did you make it like front and center at DrinkWorks and now Barrel One, thinking about that broader experience always? Because my mum didn't think much about the experience; she just concentrated on the job. I'd love her.
No, absolutely. We thought about experience end to end, and again thought broadly about it in the sense that we thought of ourselves as managing the user experience across a whole story arc that touched our various products. We had in the case of DrinkWorks, we had an appliance. We had the different drinks and their choice. We curated a whole shopping experience. There was the online sales experience, which is its own journey. And so we thought of user experience as an absolute through line for all touch points, right? And spent an awful lot of time mapping every interaction point, from hearing about us the first time through to shopping in the various channels, both online and in brick and mortar, through the actual interaction with the product, and then repeat and follow on. Here, it's very easy to think of the hospitality world of restaurants, tap rooms, and festivals and private events where our brands come to life. That is completely experiential, from the interaction with the host, or even before that, where you hear about us online, or choosing what restaurant to go to or where to go for a drink, through to the glassware and the seating and the lighting and the ambiance and the music, and through to maybe a tour and how you get the check. So the experience is absolutely paramount. The mindset of hospitality end to end is absolutely critical there, and every touch point can be improved, and it can get feedback, and it can be measured to a certain extent, right?
If I'm working on one element of it, maybe I'm making pretzels, maybe I'm, I don't know, brewing beer, maybe I'm whatever those things are. Do you spend a lot of time encouraging everybody to think of it holistically, and and as a leader, reinforcing that message over and over again?
Yeah, and it's not at it is throughout, but it is not only at the level of training the person who speaks to the customers. It is woven into our values at the level of the articulation of our culture. Hospitality mindset is one of the fundamentals of working at the company, and that goes for somebody who is a brewer in the cellar, or is somebody who's serving beer in one of the tap rooms, right? So it's woven into the DNA, and therefore is a filter for who we hire and who might exit. It is a benchmark and a yardstick. So yes, the design of the experience and the importance of the hospitality mindset is the way that we articulate that in particular is end to end, right? From the hiring process through to user interaction in a tap room.
I'm reminded of the Trader Joe's versus, sort of traditional supermarkets, and in their profitability per square foot is so much more. And when you read the HBR articles, they're quite focused on that cultural element and that customer centricity that you're talking about. Experience is something we often don't talk enough about when we're talking about agility in this way. Yuval, you're looking pensive.
Just to double down on the Trader Joe's example, it's culture, but it's also some leading indicators. So I don't remember the details, but of how they started to design this. But what Trader Joe's realized was that something that drives their success is when the associates are available.
Yeah.
In the lanes while people are shopping. So
Yeah.
they made this weird decision, come to think of it, that they're going to resupply throughout the day, not at the end of the day. That together with the culture of they're there to proactively ask you, what do you need? Do you need to find anything? That, it's a much different experience, but it's also driven by this experiment of what's going to happen if we're going to resupply throughout the day.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because they are trying that in other supermarkets, but what they haven't done a good job of is changing the equipment that they use so they take unitainers and they roll these unitainers on, because they are resupplying during the day. They've got lots of people there, but the problem is then it's too big. Whereas what Trader Joe's did a fantastic job, and to some extent enforced by just the sheer dynamics of their store, they have smaller restock tools, which gives them the ability. I mean, it's less efficient by far, but it gives you so you have to think holistically about that experience, or at least have the desire to change based on experience. Like you're bringing in those cocktails, Nathaniel, into this experience, and and you're like, oh well, no, we need somebody that represents that, because you always go to a good bartender to get a good cocktail, blah blah blah, and you're like, and the average server can't do that, or whatever. I have no idea what I'm talking about now, because cocktails aren't big in England, so we try to avoid them. But the every English person listening is like, no, we do them. Yeah, I know. But so you have to think of it holistically, and then continuously change those things.
Well, I mean, the point is that in this particular example, it's not merely the presence of the drink and that it tastes good. It's not nearly good enough. They need to see it. It needs to be well described. It needs to be sold in. It needs to be visible. And so it is. It's every one of these dimensions, and you can have the world's best tasting, most complex, delicious, multi-layer, Pousse Cafe over here that everybody would want. If they tried it, they would love it. But if they don't see it, they're not interested, and it's not sold in an appetizing way or framed up appropriately. And if the total environment doesn't work, then it can fail for 20 different reasons that has nothing to do with how delicious the drink is that they'll never put to their lips.
And to state this full circle, that requires you to have a culture where you have the ability to challenge those sacred cows.
And you've got to have somebody who came up with the idea in the first place or helped facilitate it, who has the humility to recognize that they are not going to get every one of those things right. And there are the three people closest to the product that are going to come up with the combination that is necessary. And so you've got to have the end-to-end conversation around change what needs to be changed. The goal is X, sell some of this, get feedback or whatever. You have the right to make it work. You have the obligation to make it work. And I'm going to bring you some capabilities that you didn't have before. And that's the partnership there between what we think of as platform and execution.
And I think what Andy is talking about is the difference between managing actions, activities, or even deliverables, artifacts or outputs, and managing or leading through outcomes, specifying this is the intent, this is what we would like to see, this is the leading indicator, this is the needle we're trying to move. You have the freedom, you're empowered to try and move that needle. Whatever features that product will have, what's the actual operating procedure, how will we actually design the menu, what cocktails make sense, do cocktails even make sense? Ideally, all of that happens in the last mile, happens in these teams that know what's the direction we want to head to, but have freedom to experiment and the capabilities that let them experiment.
The analog, I mean, we use an analogy that is, strategy kind of picks mountains. These bets are like planting flags on the mountain, but I don't care what path you walk up to get there.
Yeah, it is surprising how hard it is to really demonstrate that over and over again, though. The amount of times I've said, look, I don't mind how you do this, what it actually looks like. What I want is, currently my hypothesis is if we deliver this, it will do this. This is the flag. But the challenge that I have is then people still like, okay, so how, and it takes so much demonstration, coaching, I don't know the words to really describe it, so much helping to appreciate that you do have free reign. If you want to throw away these things, you can. Don't muck about. Just do it. And it's actually a lot harder than it looks, from my experience, actually.
I haven't been a fly on the wall enough when you've had these conversations with your team, Dave, but I've been the fly on the wall for a lot of other leaders. And what I've seen is it's as hard for the people that are supposed to figure out how to find the path towards that flag as it is for the leader to stop at planting the flag and not prescribe the direction.
Yeah.
If not harder for the leader. There's a leadership essence that needs to change when you want to switch towards evidence or outcome-based management rather than activity and project-based management.
It's incredibly hard, especially if you're both experienced and passionate. I fail at this all the time, with respect to having an opinion. But I try very hard, which I think is a pretty good first step, to preface it with saying, this is not prescriptive, but I'm going to give you a couple of ideas. Throw them away if you want, but here's what I'm thinking. And I typically don't completely shut up and say nothing, because I both have done a lot of stuff in the space and I've got a lot of opinions and I got a lot of passion for where they're headed. So, and sometimes I think that meets halfway, where people want some guidance and direction and maybe don't know how to do it because it's new, even though the details they're going to work out. And I'm confident of that. And so I try very hard not to be prescriptive, but by framing it explicitly that this is an opinion, not an order, or I'm not prescriptive. I'm giving some thought starters, and then you take it from here, right? And it can look nothing like this when it's finished. And good luck.
Yeah, and you sort of nailed. I'm also very passionate and have opinions, and sometimes that does get in the way. Sure. Okay, we could talk forever on this because I'm learning so much. We have to come to the end of this podcast today, and I'd love you're on a journey at the moment, and I would love to ask you to come back in 6 months, 9 months, and tell me how it's going. I know you're probably like, no, I'm never doing this again, Dave. This is awful. But if there's
I'm just going to tell you now that it's going to be perfect, and then we'll never check on how it actually went. It's going to be great. Trust me.
I know it's going to be great because it's not going to be perfect. That's the reason why the last 30 minutes I've sort of learned enough about you that fundamental appreciation that things will go wrong and there will be problems, but that's okay and that's part of the journey is is part of your DNA, which I know means that you're more likely to be successful than not. So one, I'd love to ask you back in 6-9 months, in 2026, which is a crazy date to say, but I'd love to get you back onto the platform to let me know how it goes. But our listeners are sitting there. They're listening, hopefully. And they're thinking to themselves, oh my God, there was so much there. There was, all this talk about capabilities, and not focusing on services, this idea of building this culture, like managing the appetite of risk, involving everybody. Lots and lots of really, really strong messages. But what is the one thing, I'm not going to ask both of you this question, so the one thing that you would tell our listeners, you would encourage our listeners to think about as they leave this podcast?
You want to go, Yuval?
I can go. I'll latch on to the last part of the conversation, the leadership challenge. Dharmesh Shah from HubSpot, another Boston powerhouse, he looks at developing culture as a product. A lot of fascinating stuff. We can send some links. But one thing I really like that I learned from him is what he calls flash tags. It's for every message that he sends in email, in Slack, whatever, he adds, this is an FYI. This is a suggestion. This is a recommendation. This is a plea. I really want you to do something. And by being explicit about that, it helps him avoid or minimize the effect of the voice of the legendary CTO founder that every word they say or sentence they say is considered the 10 commandments. I think you can use that. But there's something else I invite leaders that want to start this journey do, which is to look at the messages that you're sending and consider, are those outcome-oriented messages? Are they impact-oriented messages? How often is your language outcomes versus output versus activity? With AI, there's probably some interesting things you can do to scan your inbox, your Monday, your Jira, whatever, to see how much of that is outcome oriented. I do that with product managers, with business leaders. We look at the pie chart of how often do you talk in outcomes. That's an easy start. Like with flow, we first visualize the flow and then we start to shift the flow. So,
gosh, that was actually helps. 2 things then, but thanks, Yuval. That was great. Daniel, what do you think, Nathaniel?
I'll maybe come full circle a bit and say that if I were to leave a message, it would be around thinking expansively about the concept of product. That allows a couple of things. One, anytime I have a conversation like this, people are drawn to the idea that you're applying these concepts not to software or not just to software. And as soon as you step back and think comprehensively about products, which is pretty straightforward, if it's got features that you could add or improve, it's experienced by people and can get feedback in some kind of a cadence, then it's really everything. It is the company, it is its culture, it is every individual, it is groups, it is process, and yes, it's also what we would use capital P products for as well. And so the idea of applying these concepts beyond software is very easy if you take an expansive view of product.
Awesome. They were great words of wisdom, and you've actually, both of you have given me food for thought, if that's hard to say on a Friday afternoon. Your definition of product and how you think about it that expansive is even more expansive than mine, which and I thought I was pretty on the expansive side. So that's really refreshing and super interesting, and it was great, very useful. And Yuval, the two things that you did, I love thinking explicitly about the almost hashtagging when you do a message to the rest of the organization to determine what it is, and actually being upfront with that, because I send a lot of mixed message as it were. I think that in particular I like that I'm going to have to do a better job there. Gentlemen, thank you for spending this time with the Scrum.org community podcast, and myself. I've, as I said, I've learned a lot, and I think our listeners will as well. So, and I really want you back. This is a journey that you're on.
It'll be a pleasure.
I'm really excited to hear what happens. And Barrel One Collective is obviously, or Barrel One is, and the breweries that make it up are part of the institutions that are New England. So I'm really excited about the journey you're on there, which is great. And Yuval, always a pleasure, even if I feel like I'm in trouble. And thank you for listening today to today's Scrum.org community podcast. This was a pretty special one. I was joined by Yuval Yeret, as always, that my intelligent, often co-host now on the podcast. But we were both joined by Nathaniel Davis, CEO extraordinaire of Barrel One Collective here in New England, and sharing some fantastic nuggets on the journey to agility and what true agility really means. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, share with friends, and of course, come back and listen to some more. I'm lucky enough to have a variety of guests talking about everything in the area of professional Scrum, product thinking, and of course, as we heard today, real agility. Thank you, everybody, and Scrum on.